Greetings fellow humans, my name is Alistair Lord and I am the Renaissance Yorkshireman. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the myth of barter, so the origins of money, and what some of the problems with money are as they currently exist in the capitalist system that we have today. I'm not going to talk about solutions to these problems because what the problems are is a big enough topic for one video, but I will talk about some possible solutions in future videos because there's not much point in talking about the problems if you're not then going to talk about the solutions. To begin with, the origins of money. We have this common sense story, this current common sense narrative about barter, that primitive societies had barter and then at some point the system wasn't good enough, so they invented money and we started using money. And this kind of story of barter first was spoken about by Aristotle 2,500 years ago, and then later was talked about by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. But in fact, is the story of barter true or not? This is what Felix Martin has to say about this myth of barter in his book, Money, the Unauthorized Biography. He says, "In primitive times, there was no money, just barter. When people needed something that they didn't produce themselves, they had to find someone who had it and was willing to swap it for whatever they did produce. Of course, the problem with this system of barter exchange is that it was very inefficient. Blah, blah, blah. Because simple and intuitive though it may be, there is a drawback to the conventional theory of money. It is entirely false. Blah, 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 blah. Seek as they might, not a single researcher was able to find a society, historical or contemporary, that regularly conducted its trade by barter." But as it turns out, Felix Martin is not the only writer who takes on this myth of barter. And in fact, David Graeber in his book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, has this to say about the myth of barter. "The story of money for economists always begins with the fantasy of barter. The problem is where to locate this fantasy in time and space. Are we talking about cavemen, Pacific Islanders, the American frontier? Blah, 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 blah. For economists, it is in a very real sense the most important story ever told. Blah, 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 blah. It really has become ubiquitous. Wherever we find money, we also find the story. Blah, 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 blah. The story then is everywhere. It is the founding myth of our system of economic relations. Blah, 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 blah. The problem is there is no evidence to suggest that it ever happened, and an enormous amount of evidence suggesting that it did not. So let's just say straight up, for the record, this is yet another case of the stories and models of which the study of economics is built are absolute fantasy. Not the first time or the last time that this is the case. And I'll say it again. It's not the dismal science because it's not a science. It's a pseudoscience. And if you're an economist and you're telling yourself you're a scientist, well, either you're some kind of delusionist and you should see a mental health professional, or you're just going along with the lie. And in that case, you're a liar, not a scientist. So what else do mainstream economists say about money? Well, they commonly identify three possible functions of money. The first is as a medium of exchange. The second is as a unit of account, and the third is as a store of value. Now, this is true as far as it goes, but these economists are not identifying money as a means of social control. Why not? I mean, either, as far as I could work out, they're either thick or they haven't done much research, or they're a bunch of liars. I mean, they must be doing it deliberately, surely, or else they're completely incompetent. Because money is used as a form of social control. And if you're in the business of studying money and you haven't identified this, well, there's something going wrong because I mean, it quite obviously is a form of social control. In the first instance, we have a myth which is not true as the founding system of creating money. And pretty much the vast majority of planet Earth's population use money on a daily basis, but most people don't really understand what it is or how it's created. And in his 2009 work, The End of Money and the Future of Civilization, Thomas Greco has this to say on the issue of understanding money. Money is clouded in mystery, and there are few who really understand it. It is not that it is so difficult to understand, but because it is made to seem that way by financial journalists, bankers, and monetary economists who speak an obscure language, indulge in superficial speculations about market and policy changes, and behave as if the wizards of Wall Street were possessed of some superior form of knowledge. Well, I'll tell you what, the wizards of Wall Street are not possessed of some superior form of knowledge. I mean, if you've seen the Wolf of Wall Street, I mean, they're not stupid, these people, but they don't have a special form of knowledge other than how to rig the system. But that's not the way they present it. They don't present it as a rigged system, but it is. The system, the financial system as it exists today, is rigged. And the World Economic Forum are not talking about this, and neither are their neoliberal allies such as Tony Blair. So because they're not talking about it, it means they are not going to tackle it, because actually they represent a super rich class of billionaires. People like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates. Thomas Greco says this about the creation of money, and he says this in his 2001 book, Money, Understanding and Creating Alternatives to Legal Tender. He states, "It is generally believed that money is created by the government, but here is the simple truth. Today, money takes the form of bank credit that must be borrowed into circulation. In other words, conventional money commonly exists as bank deposits, that is, balance in checkings or savings accounts, that are secured by interest-bearing debt. Money is the product of a private banking cartel. The main point that needs to be understood is that in order for money to come into circulation, someone must go into debt to a bank. If there were no bank debt, there would be virtually no money. It's as simple as that. Since banks charge interest on all this debt, and since the money to pay the interest can only come from further debt, debt grows like a cancer within the global economic body. This debt imperative creates a growth imperative that is forcing us to destroy the life support systems of the planet." I mean, these economists, most of them, they're not talking about this. I mean, someone like Greco or someone like Kate Raworth or someone like David Graeber, they represent the exceptions to the rule, not the norm. And these other economists, they're just living in fantasy land. So banks lend money into existence. So let's say they lend someone £100,000, but let's say they're charging, say, 10% interest. So over a year, that person's going to pay £10,000 interest. But that £10,000 doesn't exist. It can only exist from more debt. So the money to pay off all the debt literally does not exist. The debt can never be repaid in this system where money is lent into existence bearing debt. And this is generally not discussed by mainstream economists. It's just the elephant in the room of economics. It's the dirty little secret of economics that they don't talk about. But this is the reality. So when Jeff Bezos has, I don't know, $100 billion in the bank, other people have to have debt so that Jeff Bezos can have that money. So with these super billionaire class, The rest of us have to be in debt. There's no other way that it works. Now, of course, there's a few people who have no debt and are modestly wealthy, but in general, there's a big split. You're either poor with debt and own nothing, no property, or you are super rich. But like I said, there's a small in-between class, but it's getting smaller and smaller. Greco identifies 3 more ways in which money malfunctions. 1. It is kept artificially scarce. There is never enough of it to serve the purposes for which it was created. 2. It is misallocated at source, going not to those who are most in need or who will use it most effectively, but to political power centres, especially central governments, well-connected insiders, and those who already control vast pools of growth, such as large corporations. 3. It systematically pumps wealth from the poor and middle class to the rich. And Greco expands upon this final point when he says this: debt within the current system is destructive in 2 ways. First, because of the interest, usury, that must be paid for the use of money, bank credit. And second, because of the collateral that must be forfeited when the debtor is unable to make a repayment. The chronic insufficiency of money assures that there will inevitably be some forfeitures. It is interesting to note that the word mortgage derives from the root that means death pledge, a kind of gamble. It is almost impossible anymore for a family to acquire a home without undertaking the death gamble. The single biggest problem with money today is that it is lent into existence bearing debt, and there is never enough money in existence to service this debt. But who is the debt owed to? Well, essentially it's banks and bankers, really. I mean, it's complete stitch up, this system, because these people, it's their job to create money in the same way that it's a teacher's job to teach students. But they're creating a form of money that separates them as a class. So they're serving themselves and the class of super rich that they belong to, but they're not serving other ordinary people, not like engineers or teachers or doctors or reasonable people with jobs. These economists and these bankers, they rate themselves in a way that is completely unjustified because they are doing a shit job of stewarding the economy in an environmentally sustainable manner. I mean, they just are. Let's say it how it is. Bankers and economists are doing a shit job. And we need solutions to this problem, and these people are not giving it to us. So we're going to have to look at other places. And in the next video or 2 that I make, I will be looking at some of the solutions. So don't start crying into your cornflakes too soon. Thank you for giving me your time today. Peace.